On my 20th birthday, my parents sold my tools for the family fund. Dad, another story awaits. But first, like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I turned 20 the morning. The rain came down like silver threads, the kind that makes everything look clean but somehow heavier. I remember the sound of it first, the steady rhythm against the old tin awning above the workshop, a soft tapping that used to calm me when I worked late at night. But that morning it felt different, distant, almost hollow. The tools I'd spent years collecting, gifts, savings, trades, were gone. Not stolen in the traditional sense, but taken under a word that somehow made it feel worse. Family. It started 3 days earlier, though I didn't realize then what was coming. My father had been acting strange, quieter than usual, pacing around the kitchen with his coffee cup half full, muttering to himself about bills and the cost of things. My mother tried to pretend nothing was wrong. She always did. She'd move around the house, humming low, her voice soft, her eyes always darting toward him like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. We weren't a rich family, but we managed. Dad worked construction, or at least he used to before his knee gave out last fall. Since then, he'd been taking odd jobs that barely covered the mortgage. I'd been helping when I could, fixing up lawnmowers, welding, doing small repairs for neighbors. My workshop out back was the only place that felt mine. Every tool had a story. The old drill from Mr. Tennyson across the street when I helped him build his porch. The ratchet set I bought secondhand after saving for months from mowing lawns. Even the scratched hammer with my initials burned into the handle. That workshop wasn't just tools and scrap metal. It was the one place where things made sense, where problems had solutions you could hold in your hands, where nothing depended on luck or the mood of the people around you. But that week, something shifted. The night before my birthday, Dad came into the workshop. It was late, maybe close to midnight, the light buzzing overhead, dust floating in the warm air. I was finishing up a custom steel bracket for a neighbor's ATV. When I saw him in the doorway, I almost didn't recognize him. His face looked drawn, tired in a way that wasn't just from work. "Still up?" he asked, voice low. "Almost done," I said, setting the welding torch aside. "I've just got to clean this up and—" He waved his hand. "You don't have to explain. You're good at this stuff. Always have been." That was rare. Compliments weren't his thing. He stepped inside, his boots crunching softly against the grit on the floor. He picked up one of the wrenches from the table, turned it in his hand, then set it back down. "You've put a lot into this place," and he said. "Yeah," I replied cautiously. "It's my thing, you know. Helps with bills, too." He nodded but didn't meet my eyes. "You ever think about doing something bigger with it? Like opening your own shop, maybe?" I smiled. "That's the dream. Yeah, maybe someday." He smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Someday, right." He paused, his jaw tightening. "We might need to make some adjustments soon. Family's got to stick together when things get rough." I frowned. "Adjustments?" He looked at me then, and there was something strange in his gaze, something that made my stomach twist. "We'll talk about it later," he said finally, and left before I could ask more. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a truck engine idling out back. My heart jumped. I thought maybe it was a delivery or one of the neighbors dropping off a mower. But when I looked out the window, I saw two men in work gloves loading my tool chests into the bed of a truck. At first, I thought there'd been some mistake. I threw on a jacket and ran outside, the cold morning air stinging my skin. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted. The taller of the two men turned. "We were told to pick these up. Paid for already." "By who?" He pointed toward the house. "Your dad." I froze. "No, no, no, those are mine. You can't—" "Son," came my father's voice from the porch. He stood there, hands in his pockets, watching me. "Let them finish." "What are you talking about?" I said, my voice cracking. "That's my stuff. You can't just—" He cut me off. "We needed the money. It's for the family fund." "Family fund? What family fund?" He didn't answer right away. The sound of the ratchet chest slamming into the truck bed made me flinch. I ran toward it, but he stepped down from the porch, blocking me. His face was stone. "You're not a kid anymore," he said. "You know how hard things have been. Your mother's been behind on the utilities. I'm 2 months late on the truck payment. You've been living under this roof rent-free, using our power for that shop. It's time you contribute for real." "I have been," I shouted. "All the money from my repairs, I give you half every month." He shook his head. "It's not enough. We're drowning and you're out there playing mechanic." "Playing?" I felt my chest tighten. "Dad, that's my livelihood. Those tools are all I have." He sighed. "You'll get over it. It's just stuff. We'll all get through this if we tighten up." The men finished loading, closed the truck bed, and drove off. The sound of the engine faded down the road while I stood there feeling the weight of everything collapse inside me. My mother came out a few minutes later, her robe pulled tight around her, eyes red. She didn't say anything, just looked at me like she wanted to but couldn't. "Did you know?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "He said it was necessary." I tried to stop him. I turned away. The rest of the day blurred. My friends texted happy birthday, unaware that everything I'd built was gone. The rain started that evening, light at first, then steady. I sat in the empty workshop, the smell of metal and dust clinging to the air. Every empty shelf felt like a wound. When I finally went inside, Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, writing something in his notebook. The TV was on, but muted. "Where's the money?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Safe. Don't worry about it." "I want to see it." He set down his pen and sighed. "It's not your concern. It's for the family." "I am the family," I snapped. "You just sold everything I own. You can't—" He slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. You think you're the only one who's sacrificed? You think you're better than us because you can fix a few engines? You're still under my roof. You follow my rules." My mother flinched but said nothing. I stared at him, anger and disbelief burning through me. "You don't even see what you've done," I said. "You didn't sell tools. You sold my future." I walked out before he could respond. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the workshop until dawn, staring at the empty space where my tool chest used to be. Something in me hardened. 2 days later, I found out where the tools went. It wasn't hard. Small town, few secrets. Mr. Larkin from the hardware store mentioned seeing my dad talking to a guy named Harris, a local junk dealer who bought equipment cheap and flipped it. When I drove by Harris's yard, I saw my old welder sitting right there by the fence. I went home, furious. When I confronted Dad, he didn't even deny it. "They're gone," he said flatly. "Deal's done." "You didn't even get a fair price, did you?" He looked away. "I got what I could. You should be thanking me. That money's keeping this house afloat." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Something in his eyes told me it wasn't just desperation. It was control, like he wanted to prove a point. I decided that night that I wasn't staying. But before I left, I wanted one thing: to get my tools back. I spent that night in the car, the engine idling low so I could stay warm. The rain had stopped, leaving a glistening sheen over the streets. The orange glow of the streetlights reflected in puddles like molten gold. I kept thinking about the welder in Harris's yard, about the ratchet sets, the hammers, the tools I'd painstakingly collected over the last decade. Each one carried memories, small victories, a record of late nights and long hours spent learning. And now they were out of my reach, sold off without a thought, like someone had liquidated a few sheets of plywood instead of a piece of my life. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was plastered to my forehead from the drizzle, and my eyes were bloodshot. I didn't even realize I'd been clenching the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles were white. I could feel the anger simmering in my chest, but beneath it was something darker, a gnawing suspicion that this wasn't just about money. Something in my father's eyes that night told me the story was bigger, messier, and far more personal than he let on. I drove to Harris's yard the next morning. The sky was gray, the kind of dull light that made everything feel heavier. Harris himself was leaning against the chain link fence, a cigarette dangling lazily from his lips. When he saw me, he straightened, exhaling a plume of smoke. Us. You're the kid with the tools, he said, flicking the cigarette onto the gravel. They belong to me, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. My dad sold them. I want them back. Harris chuckled. Son, you don't just take stuff back once it's sold. That's not how the world works. It was stolen. They're mine, I shouted, taking a step forward. He leaned back against the fence, studying me, the smoke curling in lazy rings around his face. Look, I don't care whose they are. Your dad sold them. I bought them. That's it. I could feel my jaw tightening. Did he sell them for real money, or is this some kind of scam? He shrugged. Enough to keep him fed, I guess. Don't know. Don't care. Like I said, deal's done. I clenched my fists, stepping closer, the gravel crunching under my shoes. You don't understand. Those tools, they're everything I have. Every scrap of money I ever earned went into that workshop. They're not just tools. Harris studied me for a long moment. You really love that stuff, huh? I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. He could smell desperation on me. Or maybe he just saw it in my eyes. You know, he said finally, if you're serious, there might be a way. I froze. A way? To. He nodded toward the welder sitting by the fence. Might be a way to get 'em back, but it won't be easy. Your dad's involved, and he doesn't like people poking around in his business. You're gonna have to get creative. I swallowed hard. Creative how? Harris smirked. Patience, observation, and a little nerve. Come back tomorrow night, midnight, alone. Don't tell anyone. I nodded. My pulse was already racing. This was dangerous, but I didn't care. I couldn't let it go. That night, I parked a few blocks away from Harris's yard, keeping to the shadows. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the wet pavement, and I felt like I was part of some old noir film. The kind where the protagonist is broke, desperate, and out of options. I watched Harris's yard for what felt like hours, until the lights inside the building flicked off and silence took over. I slipped through the side gate, careful not to disturb the gravel. My heart hammered in my chest as I crept toward the welder. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to abandon this reckless plan, but my hands itched to touch the machines to reclaim what was mine. As I reached the welder, I heard the crunch of boots behind me. I spun around, expecting Harris, but it was my father. What are you doing here? He hissed, voice low but sharp. I froze. Dad, I'm getting my tools back. He shook his head, his face tight with anger and something else I couldn't place. Fear, maybe. You don't understand. It's not that simple. You're making a mistake. I don't care. Those tools are mine. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the yard as if he was calculating something. You think this is about tools? It's not about tools, it's about control, about legacy. You don't know what you're touching. Control? Legacy? Dad, they're tools, not a family heirloom. He laughed, but it was hollow, brittle. You've got no idea. You've never had to make the hard choices. Never had to carry the weight of keeping this family alive. I stared at him. You didn't even ask me. You just sold them. His face softened for a moment, then hardened again. I did what I had to do. You'll understand someday. Maybe too late, but right now, you need to leave. Go home. I shook my head. No, not until I get what's mine. Something in his expression changed, an almost imperceptible shift, like he was deciding how much to tell me. Finally, he spoke. There's more than just money here. That family fund? It's not what you think. Your mother, your grandmother, they left something in it. Something that was never meant for you to touch until the time was right. I blinked, confused. What are you talking about? He looked away, jaw tight. Your tools, the workshop, they're part of it. Part of the plan I had for you, but you were too focused on the here and now to see it. I laughed bitterly. A plan? You sold my stuff. There's nothing left. He took a deep breath. Go home tonight. Think about what I said. Don't act out of anger. There are things you're not ready to handle yet. And then he disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone with the tools, within reach yet still impossible to take. The next week was a blur of tension. I couldn't focus on school or work. Every time I looked at the empty workshop, Every time I passed the tool chestless space, my stomach twisted. I started watching my parents more closely, noticing the little things, the way my father would make calls and step outside for 10 minutes, the way my mother would glance at him nervously, as if she were afraid he'd snap at any second. Then came the letters. I started receiving them 2 days later. No return address, just typed notes slipped under my door. The first one read, "Stop digging. Some things are meant to stay buried." I crumpled it, threw it in the trash. But then the next one came. "You don't know the half of it. If you go to Harris again, you'll regret it." Fear mingled with rage. Someone was watching me, tracking me, warning me off. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. I went back to Harris, pretending to be casual, but this time I brought questions. Questions about the fund, about my father, about the things he refused to explain. Harris studied me for a long time, tapping ash from his cigarette. "You're poking a hornet's nest," he said finally. "You think this is just about tools? Think bigger. Way bigger. Your family's got secrets buried deep. You scratch at one thing, it'll all come out." "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "I mean that fund your dad's been hiding. It's not just money, it's evidence, power, leverage. Stuff people would kill for, and right now you're staring at the edge of it, trying to figure out which side to jump on." I left, my stomach churning. Evidence? Power? Leverage? I felt like I'd wandered into a world I didn't understand, one that existed right beneath the surface of my suburban, ordinary life. At home, I confronted my mother. "Mom, what's in that fund? Why did Dad sell my tools if it's so important?" She looked at me, eyes wide, the color draining from her face. I I can't tell you. Not yet. He'd kill me if he knew I told you anything." "Mom, it's already out of hand. I'm not asking permission. I'm asking the truth." She shook her head. "Some truths aren't for your age, maybe never. You need to trust me and him. Please, trust him." I left the room, more confused and angry than ever. Trust? After he sold everything I had? I began piecing it together on my own. I spent hours combing through old bills, letters, receipts, anything that might give me a hint about what Dad was hiding. I even sneaked into his study one night, rifling through files and drawers. That's when I found it. A ledger, old and leather bound, hidden under a false bottom in the filing cabinet. The first page made my heart stop. My father's neat handwriting listed dates, amounts, and names, but not like a typical financial record. It included initials, locations, and cryptic notes. MW pending, GT sealed, JS cleared. I flipped through pages, stomach twisting. It was more than money. It was a catalog of transactions, deals. Everything was coded, secret, precise. Some of the notes had dates that coincided with events I remembered growing up. Neighbors moving suddenly, family friends disappearing from town. The ledger hinted at something deeper, something my father had shielded from me my whole life. And then I realized with a chill running down my spine, my tools weren't just tools, they were collateral. Part of a larger plan my father had orchestrated for years, one I was only beginning to understand. I sat there, the ledger trembling in my hands, the weight of the secret pressing down. And that's when I understood. The stakes were bigger than I could imagine, and the person I thought I knew best might be my greatest obstacle. The ledger sat in my lap like a living thing, its pages yellowed and brittle, carrying secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. The handwriting was meticulous, almost obsessive. My father had cataloged everything with precision. It wasn't just numbers, it was dates, initials, and cryptic annotations that hinted at a network of people, places, and promises I had never known existed. My hand shook as I flipped through it, each page revealing a layer of my family I'd never imagined. Deals, exchanges, favors owed and collected. Things that weren't illegal exactly, but bordered on something darker, something I didn't want to think about. I felt the first stab of betrayal. This wasn't just about money, it was about control. My father had been orchestrating this life, my life, our lives, with rules I hadn't even known existed. And every time I'd complained about chores, about responsibilities, about dreams that felt just out of reach, maybe it had been him shaping me, testing me, keeping me in line without ever telling me the truth. I spent hours in his study, the house silent except for the occasional creak of floorboards. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow exaggerated. I started cross referencing the initials with names I knew: neighbors, friends, old acquaintances. Some made sense, some didn't. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the ledger wasn't just a record of financial dealings, it was a map of influence, of leverage, of control that extended far beyond our home. I closed the ledger and stared at the ceiling. What did it all mean? How much of my life had been orchestrated and how much was real? I couldn't tell anymore. That night, I decided I needed answers, not from my parents, not from Harris, but from someone outside the house, someone who might see the ledger without the fear of family loyalty clouding their judgment. I drove to the one person I could think of: my uncle, my father's brother, a man I hadn't spoken to in years but who had always struck me as sharp, secretive, and terrifyingly intelligent. His house was on the edge of town, a small, weathered ranch style place surrounded by tall pines. I parked under the yellow glow of the streetlight and walked to the door. Uncle Ray answered, his eyes narrowing as he took in my disheveled appearance. "Sonny," he said, using the nickname I hadn't heard in years. "What brings you out here at this hour?" "I need your help," I said, voice tight. "It's my father. Something's wrong. He's hiding things, dangerous things. I found this." I held up the ledger. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed again. He stepped back, gesturing for me to come inside. The warmth of the house hit me like a wave, a stark contrast to the damp chill outside. Uncle Ray led me to a small living room, cluttered with books, maps, and old newspaper clippings. He gestured for me to sit while he took the ledger from me. He flipped through it slowly, his expression unreadable. "Where did you get this?" "From Dad's study," I said. I I needed to know the truth. He closed the ledger with a snap. "Truth has a price, Sonny. You sure you want to pay it?" "I have to," I said. "I need to know why he sold my tools, why the family fund is so important, and what all this means." He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant, thinking. Finally, he spoke. "Your father, he's been guarding something for decades, something that doesn't belong to him alone, something your grandmother left, but not in the way most people think. It's a network, a system, built on trust, loyalty, and fear. The ledger, that's the backbone. That's how he's kept it all together." I frowned. "Network? System? Uncle Ray, I don't understand. This is just a ledger of money, right?" He shook his head. "Money is just the visible part. The real power lies in knowing who owes what, who's compromised, who can be persuaded, threatened, or controlled. Your father inherited that system, and he's been managing it for years. Every payment, every transaction, every tool, every workshop you built, it all factors into it." I felt my stomach twist. "So, the tools, they weren't just tools?" "No," he said softly. "They were collateral. Not just for money, but for leverage. Every person, every favor owed, every secret. It's connected to tangible assets, things you could touch, things that anchor the system in reality. Your father sold your tools because he had to. They were part of a chain, and someone higher up demanded it." I couldn't believe it. My father had taken everything from me, everything I'd built with my own hands, not just because of desperation, but because he was maintaining a system I didn't even know existed. "Higher up?" I asked. "Who?" Uncle Ray leaned closer, lowering his voice. "People you don't want to know, powerful people. People who operate in shadows. Your father has kept us safe from them for decades. Those tools, they were a buffer, a shield. By taking them, he's making a statement, or maybe a sacrifice. I don't know yet, but you need to be careful, very careful." I sat there, absorbing everything. My life had been ordinary, mundane even until now, and now I was staring into something vast, dangerous, and entirely unknown. "You have to understand," Uncle Ray continued. "Your father's methods are unconventional. Sometimes harsh, sometimes cruel, but he's always thinking 5 steps ahead. Those letters you received? Warnings. Harris, a test, and the ledger? Proof that he's keeping everything under control. He's not cruel for cruelty's sake. He's cruel to protect us. Or at least that's how he justifies it. I felt a surge of anger. Protect us? He sold my tools. He sold my future. Uncle Ray's eyes were sharp. Sonny, sometimes protection looks like betrayal. Right now, your father thinks he's protecting you from yourself, from the world, from forces you don't understand. But you're no longer a child. You need to act wisely, or you'll become a pawn just like the rest. I left his house that night with more questions than answers. The sky was overcast, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. Driving home, I felt the weight of everything pressing down. I was alone in this, and the only person I thought I knew, my father, was now a mystery. The next day, I returned to Harris, determined to reclaim at least the tools. I needed a plan. I couldn't just storm in again. I had to understand the layout, the people, the timing. Harris noticed me approaching. You're persistent, he said, lighting another cigarette. I like that. But you're walking a knife's edge, kid. Your father isn't the only one watching. What do you mean? I asked, my voice tight. He studied me, exhaling smoke slowly. There are others who want what your father has built. You think he's protecting the family fund? He's protecting himself. Everyone else? They'd take it all in a heartbeat. I realized then that this wasn't just about my tools. It was about survival, about navigating a world I'd never seen, a world where trust was fragile, secrets were currency, and betrayal was inevitable. That night, I slipped into Harris's yard again, armed with nothing but determination and the knowledge that my father's actions were part of something bigger than me. The welder sat there, glowing faintly in the moonlight like a beacon. Every tool I touched sent a shiver down my spine. As I loaded a few of the smaller items into my backpack, I heard a rustle. I froze. Someone was approaching from the far corner of the yard. Shadows moved, and a voice whispered, I wouldn't do that if I were you. I spun around. My father emerged from the darkness, his expression unreadable. You're really going to take this into your own hands? He asked. I have to, I said. These are mine. I earned them. He shook his head. Sonny, you still don't get it. Taking these tools isn't just theft. It's a message, and messages have consequences. I swallowed hard, my chest tight. Then tell me why. Why sell them? Why hide the fund? Why all the secrecy? For the first time, I saw vulnerability in his eyes, a flicker of the man I thought I knew. I'm trying to protect you, he said quietly. From them, from the system, from me, but maybe it's too late. And then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled, faint and bitter. Come on, I'll explain. But you need to understand, some truths will change everything you thought you knew about this family because it's about me forever. I hesitated for a moment, fear and curiosity warring inside me. And then, against every instinct screaming at me to run, I followed him into the shadows, into the night, into the unknown. We moved through the shadows behind Harris's yard in silence, the night air thick and humid, carrying the faint smell of wet grass and oil. My father's silhouette was calm, almost too calm, but his presence was imposing. For the first time in my life, I realized how much he commanded, not through loudness or force, but through knowledge, through knowing things I couldn't even comprehend. Where are we going? I whispered. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he led me down a narrow path between two tall hedges, the gravel crunching softly under our feet. I need you to see something, he said finally. Something I've been keeping from you, for your own safety, and perhaps because I didn't trust you could handle it yet. We arrived at a small clearing behind a row of abandoned warehouses. Moonlight streamed through breaks in the clouds, illuminating crates, rusted barrels, and stacks of pallets. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary storage yard, but I could sense there was more. My father stopped beside a rusted metal container and pushed open the door. Inside, the space was surprisingly organized. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes, envelopes, and several of my missing tools. My heart jumped. The welder, my ratchet sets, even the custom hammer with my initials burned into the handle. You you had them all along? I whispered, disbelief lacing my voice. He nodded. I did, but I couldn't let you touch them yet. Everything you value can be a weapon or a shield, depending on who wields it. I stepped closer, running my hand over the cold steel of the tools. Relief surged, but it was tinged with suspicion. Then why sell them? Why lie? He sighed and gestured for me to follow him deeper into the container. At the far end, he pulled back a tarp, revealing a small desk with papers, files, and a laptop. On the desk, a thick, bound ledger sat beside a stack of envelopes addressed to names I didn't recognize. This, he said, voice low, is the family fund in its entirety. I stared at it, trying to make sense of the organized chaos. So, all this money, all these names, it's what you've been protecting? He nodded. Not just the money, it's information, power, leverage. Every tool, every asset, every favor owed, it's all recorded here. People underestimate the power of knowledge, of knowing the right secrets at the right time. That's what your grandmother left. And that's what I've been safeguarding for decades. I felt a chill run down my spine. So, selling my tools, that wasn't about keeping the house afloat. It was, I trailed off, my stomach twisting. It was a sacrifice, he admitted. A message. You're growing into the world, and the world you're stepping into isn't kind. Those tools, they were a test. And the fund, it's bigger than you or me. If it falls into the wrong hands, everything we've built, everything we've protected, crumbles. I sank onto a crate, overwhelmed. I don't understand. What kind of network is this? Why does it involve tools and favors and people disappearing? He rubbed his face, exhaustion etched into every line. It's a system your grandmother created, a web of accountability. People pledged loyalty, favors, secrets. In return, they received protection, guidance, opportunities. But when someone abuses that trust, consequences follow. The ledger tracks everything: who owes what, who's compromised, who needs to be managed. It's intricate, fragile, and dangerous. And yes, sometimes people disappear when the system dictates it. My head spun. Disappear? You mean people die? He hesitated. Sometimes. Rarely, but yes. Occasionally, the system demands harsh measures. It's not something I take lightly. That's why I've been meticulous, careful. Everything I've done, including selling your tools, has been to maintain balance, to ensure we survive. I sat back, horror and disbelief flooding me. My father, the man I had trusted, had been orchestrating a network of power, secrets, and influence that I had no idea existed. My life, my family, everything I had known, it felt like a veneer over something much darker, much larger than I could have imagined. And you expect me to just accept this? I asked finally, voice tight. You expect me to understand that selling my tools, hiding everything from me, it was all part of some plan? He nodded. I don't expect you to accept it. I expect you to survive it, to understand it when the time is right. You're not ready yet, but you're coming close. I felt a surge of anger. I've been living in your shadow my whole life, thinking I knew the rules, only to find out the rules weren't for me. They were for some hidden game I didn't even know I was playing. He stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. You're not a pawn, not anymore. You're the heir. Eventually, all of this will be yours to manage: the fund, the network, the ledger. But first, you need to understand how dangerous it can be, and you need to learn who to trust. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down. And Harris, the letters, the warnings? Tests, he said simply, to see how far you'd go, how determined you are, how careful you can be. You've done well, but this is only the beginning. The people who want what I've built are patient, cunning, and ruthless. They will try to manipulate, to tempt, to betray. And when they do, you have to be ready. I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. Everything I had thought was simple: tools, money, family, had turned into something far more complex, far more dangerous. And now I was being thrust into it. What about Mom? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Has she has she been part of this? He hesitated. She's been a guardian in her own way. She's kept certain secrets, protected you from the truth when you were too young to understand. She knows more than you think, but she's not the strategist I am. She follows my lead, and sometimes that's a burden. I felt my chest tighten. So she's been lying? Not lying, he corrected. Protecting. There's a difference. She's always loved you, always tried to shield you from the dangers of this life, but now the shield is coming down. You have to see clearly, or you'll be blindsided. I nodded slowly, absorbing the enormity of what he was saying. The tools, the fund, the ledger, they weren't just possessions. They were symbols, weapons, keys to a network of secrets that spanned decades. And I was standing on the threshold, about to step into a world that my father had spent a lifetime controlling. Do you understand now why I had to sell the tools? He asked softly. I clenched my fists. I think I understand, but it doesn't make it any easier. And I still don't trust anyone. Not fully. He smiled faintly. Good. You shouldn't. Not yet. Trust is earned. And sometimes it's a liability. The next morning, I returned to Harris's yard. This time, I wasn't just there to reclaim my tools. I was there to learn, to observe, to understand the stakes. Harris watched me closely, his usual smirk replaced by something sharper, more calculating. You're different now, he said. I can see it in your eyes. You're awake. You know there's more at play. But here's the thing. Knowing isn't the same as surviving. That's the lesson your father's been trying to teach you all along. I studied him, trying to read his intentions. Then teach me, I said. I want to know everything. Every rule, every danger, every secret. He laughed softly. That's a bold statement, kid. But, okay, we start small. First, you have to understand that this world, it doesn't play fair. Tools, money, favors, loyalty, they're all just pieces. People lie, people cheat, people kill. And the people who survive are the ones who can see the moves before anyone else makes them. I nodded, determination settling into my chest like armor. Then I'll survive. Harris smirked. We'll see. But remember, the first lesson is this. Never underestimate your father. He's been preparing you for this moment longer than you can imagine. And sometimes the hardest truths are the ones hidden in plain sight. As I walked back home, the weight of what I had learned pressed down on me. The ledger, the tools, the family fund, they were all part of a larger web, a system of power and secrecy that demanded vigilance, cunning, and courage. And for the first time in my life, I realized that my father hadn't just sold my tools. He had tested me, forced me to see the world as it truly was. And I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a blur of vigilance, observation, and quiet calculation. I spent every waking hour thinking about the ledger, the tools, the network my father had created, and the intricate dance of loyalty and secrecy that defined our family. Every conversation I overheard, every glance my parents exchanged, felt laden with hidden meaning. I was learning to see the world in layers, the surface of ordinary life, and beneath it, the invisible threads of influence, power, and control. One night, my father summoned me to the workshop, the one that had once been mine, now emptied of tools but filled with memories. The moonlight spilled through the dusty windows, illuminating the bare benches and cold concrete floor. He stood in the center, hands clasped behind his back, watching me with the same intensity that had marked his every interaction since I could remember. Tonight, he said, you'll see everything, the truth. The reason for the fund, for the ledger, for everything you've been questioning. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I'm ready, I said. He nodded and led me to a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. I'd never noticed it before, though I'd spent countless hours in this workshop. He pulled back the panel to reveal a small safe, reinforced and heavy. From it, he extracted a thin stack of envelopes, each marked with dates spanning decades. These, he said, voice low, are the original intentions of the family fund. Your grandmother created it not for money, not for tools, not for personal gain. She created it to protect knowledge, knowledge that could destroy people, communities, even governments if it fell into the wrong hands. Every asset, every favor, every secret recorded in the ledger, it's all part of safeguarding that knowledge. I swallowed hard. So, all this time you've been protecting dangerous information? He nodded. Yes, and the tools. They were a buffer, a physical representation of security. Selling them wasn't just a financial move, it was a statement, a warning, and a sacrifice all at once. Someone tried to infiltrate our system. Someone wanted the knowledge, and I had to show them, and you, that nothing is untouchable, that control requires sacrifice. I felt a mix of awe, fear, and disbelief. So, all those warnings, all those letters, it was about testing me? Exactly, he said. To see if you could think, act, and survive under pressure. To see if you understood the weight of the responsibility you're about to inherit. I sank onto the dusty floor, trying to absorb it all. The world I had thought was ordinary, my small town, my family, my home, was actually a web of power, secrecy, and danger I had never imagined. My father had been preparing me, shaping me, whether I realized it or not. And now, he said, you must decide. Will you accept the responsibility? Will you step into the role I've prepared you for? I looked around the empty workshop, remembering every late night, every repair, every moment I had thought was mine alone. I realized that even in my anger, in my rebellion, I had been learning without knowing it. Every decision, every struggle, every confrontation had prepared me for this moment. Yes, I said finally. I'll do it. I'll take responsibility. I'll protect it, even if it's dangerous, even if it costs me everything. He smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and sorrow. Good. But remember, knowledge is heavier than any tool. And trust. Trust is the heaviest burden of all. The following weeks were a whirlwind of training and instruction. My father guided me through the ledger, teaching me to read between the lines, to recognize patterns, to understand influence and leverage. Harris became an unexpected ally, revealing the nuances of observation, timing, and subtle negotiation. My mother quietly taught me patience, empathy, and the importance of shielding those you love without exposing them to unnecessary harm. And as I worked, I began to understand the weight of legacy. I realized that the tools I had once thought were just objects were symbols of something much larger: trust, responsibility, sacrifice. They weren't just instruments for work, they were instruments of power and guardianship. One evening, as I sat in the workshop with my father, we were silent for a long time. I looked around at the recovered tools, at the ledger, at the network of envelopes and notes that represented decades of careful orchestration. I realized something that terrified and exhilarated me at once. I was no longer just a boy who loved to fix engines. I was now a guardian of knowledge, a steward of power, and someone who had to navigate a world where a single misstep could cost lives. Do you regret selling the tools? I asked him finally. He looked at me, eyes soft but resolute. Not for a second. You had to learn, and now you understand why. You see the weight of it, the responsibility, the danger. That understanding is worth more than any tool or any ledger. I nodded slowly. I think I do, and I think I'm ready. He smiled faintly, and for the first time in years, I felt a connection with him that went beyond anger, fear, or rebellion. It was a quiet understanding, a shared burden, a shared responsibility, and a shared legacy. As I closed the workshop door that night, the moonlight falling across the concrete floor, I realized how much had changed. My life was no longer just mine. It was intertwined with history, with secrecy, with responsibility I'd never asked for, but now could not escape. And I understood finally that the family fund was never just about money. It was about survival, knowledge, and the cost of trust. I sat outside for hours thinking, reflecting, the night quiet except for the faint hum of the town beyond. The tools gleamed faintly in the moonlight, silent witnesses to the revelations of the past weeks. And I wondered, how much of the world around us is hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice. How many choices we make are truly our own, and how many are shaped by unseen forces, by legacy, by sacrifice? And if you were given the weight of knowledge and power, could you bear it, or would it break you? I realized then that the story wasn't just about my father, my family, or even the tools. It was about understanding that life is a web of secrets, decisions, and consequences. And each of us, in our own way, must choose how to navigate it, carefully, wisely, and with courage. The tools weren't mine alone, and neither was the knowledge. They were ours, a burden and a gift, a warning and a legacy, a test and a promise. And in that quiet night, under the glow of a pale moon, I understood that the real challenge had just begun. As you watch this story unfold, consider the weight of responsibility in your own life. How do the choices of those who came before you shape your path, whether you realize it or not? When confronted with secrets or power, what would you do? Protect it, exploit it, or walk away? And finally, when someone sacrifices for you in ways you may never fully understand, can you recognize the cost and learn to carry it wisely?